Hej och hjärtligt välkomna till det här författarsamtalet som är det sista i en rad av 7 samtal där vi har fått en chans att möta årets nominerade till Nordiska rådets litteraturpris. Jag heter Sunna Dís Másdóttir och ska idag få tala med 2 av kandidaterna, nämligen Andri Snær Magnason från Island och Inga Ravna Eira från samiska språkområdet. Dagens samtal kommer bli en riktig språkfest som det kan bli i nordiska sammanhang. Ingen av oss kommer prata sitt modersmål, tror jag, men Inga Ravna Eira kommer bland annat läsa upp på samiska och norska. Jag pratar svenska och kommer sedan växla till engelska när jag talar med Andri Snær. Så jag ber om förståelse om det rör ihop sig fullständigt här för mig, men jag gör så gott jag kan. Andri Snær and I are sitting here in the beautiful Nordic house in Reykjavik, where we have been having quite lovely sunny weather, but rather cold still. And the volcanic eruption in our backyard, basically. But thank you so much for being here with me, Andri. It really feels quite special after a year of online meetings and talks.
Yes, I was unmasked today and I felt like I was naked.
Yes, like you forgot to put something on. Och Inga sitter hemma i Karasjok i Nord-Norge. Jag tänkte att jag börjar med att presentera er båda 2 innan vi går över till att få höra er läsa och prata lite mer om era verk. Så Inga Ravna Eira är en samisk författare från Karasjok. Hon skriver lyrik, noveller och barnböcker på nordsamiska. År 2019 nominerades hon till Nordiska rådets litteraturpris för diktsamlingen Dette icke den jorda, som den heter på norska i Ingas översättning. Hon arbetar också med flera konstnärliga uttryck och har tillsammans med andra konstnärer arbetat med performanceföreställningar och framfört sina dikter i musikpoesiföreställningen Kuologiaki, or the Silhouette Stone.
Ja,
det lät mycket bättre så. Tack. Hon rör sig också gärna på gränserna mellan rap och slampoesi. Eiras sista diktsamling, Kahtara idit, eller Vokterens morgon, är nominerad till Nordiska rådets litteraturpris för det samiska språkområdet. I diktsamlingen är närheten till naturen och tidigare generationer centrala teman. Dikterna är väldigt musikaliska och rytmiska, som vi ska få höra här senare, som i både Doggilagga och Driving av Rej. Så att man ganska enkelt kan föreställa sig rösten bakom orden. Och diktaren använder sig av upprepningar och kanske jojkstrofer som fängslar läsaren, även om man inte nödvändigtvis förstår de samiska orden eller uttrycken som används. Andri Snær Magnason is an Icelandic writer who has written poetry, children's books and novels along with non-fiction. His 2006 book Dreamland, a self-help manual for a frightened nation, was made into a documentary and had a huge impact on the debate about environmental issues in Iceland. His children's book, The Story of the Blue Planet, has been published in over 40 countries, I think, at the time of counting. Andris' latest book, Tíman og vatnið, or On Time and Water, is nominated for the Nordic Council Literature Prize. In it, he draws together everything from pictures from old family albums and tales of ancestors to mythology and interviews with the Dalai Lama, mixing all in with a harrowing presentation of the huge challenge we face as a civilization as the global warming crisis worsens. It's a very personal book, yet at the same time quite global. A dance of both emotions and science and the words and stories that bind us. We'll get back to Andri and his book in a while, but I think I will... jag ska gå över till dig, Inga, i Karasjok. Och jag vill helt enkelt börja med att be dig berätta lite om bakgrunden till den här boken. Dette icke den jorda, som jag nämnde tidigare, nominerades för 2 år sedan, och där är den är som en monolog nästan, där det är en samisk gudinna som talar till jordens barn som inte har, eller som har svikit sitt uppdrag egentligen med att ta hand om jorden. Och i den här nya boken så ser man ju lite ekon av samma teman kanske, som i dikterna Hjärtet banket och Gudene. Men här har man också det inslag av humor och lekfullhet. Kan du berätta lite om bakgrunden och hur den här boken kanske skiljer sig från din förra?
Ja, det är ju det här med den här ekologiska krisen som är bakgrunnen. Men det handlar inte om det. Da jag började skriva om den här så var det jag satt och tänkte. Vad är det viktigaste i samisk kultur och reindrifts samisk kultur som jag kunde tänka mig och efterlata i en bok till barn och unga? Hvis det en gång går så galt att något av det vi håller på med att bli borta, sånt som reindrift. Och det är det som är bakgrunden för den här boken. Ja, då har jag prövat att skriva. Det är egentligen en väldigt stor historia som är inne i de diktene. Det med driving av rein, det är ju om reindrift. Och så har jag beskrivit de vackra viddene våra. Jag har också tagit med mattraditioner som doggilegga är blivit ett fint dikt av. Och så samernas urfolksreligion som framdeles är ganska levande hos oss, men det är inte en egen religion i den förstand, men vi har många elementer av det. Och som förr så är den religionen också blivit stämplet för avgudsreligion. Och det är väldigt rart för mig att tänka att det är avguds, för det är en viktig religion för oss. Och det är egentligen det den här handlar om. Och så efter att samerna blev kristnet, sånt som det har skett med hela världen, så det som är blivit igen av den gamla religionen, det är jojken. När jag gick på skolan så blev den stämplet för syndig. Vi fick inte lov att jojkene. Vi hade lärt hemma. Fortällartraditionen, den är ju levande. Och tro på andliga krafter, det är nog kanske inte så levande i norsk tradition som hos oss. Kanske på bygderna. Och det här diktet som heter Hjärtebanker, där är det ju jordas hjärta som banker. Ofta hamrar det när det ser hurdan jorda behandlas. Så egentligen är det ju på en måte samma tema det dreier sig om. Och jojken, den håller ju på att försvinna hvis vi inte gör något med att bevara den. Och inte bara bevara den, men lära den vidare till både barn och unga. Och det har varit slik att vår kultur och vårt språk, våra näringar, de har alltid varit truet. Och de trues ända på forskjellige måter av storsamfunnets behov. Och som same så må jag alltid vara på vakt. Fordi jag føler att jag har så stort ansvar. Och därför må jag alltid vara klar till att försvara mitt samiska språk och den samiska kulturen. Men detta gör jag av kärlighet till mitt folk och mitt språk. Och det är detta jag önskar att överföra barna och unga. Och det är liksom bakgrunden för hela boken.
Är det den vakten som återspeglas i titeln kanske? Vakterens mån?
Ja, vakterens mån går ju på det att hoppet mitt är att vi en gång vaknar till en ren världen. En grön jord. Och hvor allt är fint. Men det vet jag inte om vi gör. Men hopp är ju.
Hoppet finns där. Då tänker jag att det skulle vara roligt att få höra några av dikterna om du vill läsa för oss.
Ja, men jag hoppas att jag inte behöver läsa på bägge språk, men jag kan läsa någon på samisk som jag inte klarar att läsa på norsk.
Ja, det låter bra.
Och det är det första diktet. Men här har jag samlat en del ord som har med reindrift att göra, sånt som ena och zus. Det är när du snackar roligt till en körerein eller. Och så har jag samlat många ord som man brukar när man driver reinen, för exempel i ett gär eller när man ska flytta. Och Chebo, det är namnet på hunden som är en viktig hjälper för reindriftssamerna. Och här så jagas ju Chebo av sted. Då börjar jag. Vet jag lärt mig. Ena, zus, 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 ena, zus, 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 kish, kush, kush. Det gör röggaligt. Man hodi. Hej. Hoj. Chebo. Väkt. Hej. Hoj. Kiss. Zo. Chabudo. Det gör röggaligt. Man hodi. Väkt. Hoj. Kiss. Kush. Chebo. Vad säger du? Chebo. Guadio. Chebo. Ena. Zus. Ena. Zus. Ena. Zus. Ska bara fortsätta vidare.
Gärna.
Då tar jag det på norsk, det nästa. Gudene vendte om jorda, gjemte gullet og rikdommene under steinene, men de fremmede fant det likevel. Gudene fylte jorda med vann, gjemte oljen og rikdommene under havbunnen, men de fremmede fant det likevel. Åndene og huldrene flyktet, gjemte seg i fjellene, men de fremmede plaget dem likevel. Hvordan tør de utfordre guder og ånder? Og den neste, den må jeg nok også lese på samisk. Bör jag läsa det jag läser på samisk på norsk också?
Nej, jag tror det går fint att blanda. Det är ju helt fantastiskt att få höra samiskan också, tycker jag.
Vai mudzoki, julki, mattui kohtjumi, varjali sivni dämme määnaide. Kulako mattui imastämin horagallasa suhtu, päivätsä valdi pahkasa. Kulako mattui ootsahallamin etnama haltasedji. Kulako ähkäi morastämin määnäi, kiei suhkun aimu hauhkada. Vai mudzoki, julki, mattui kohtjumi, varjali sivnidämme määnäide. Välji kuulai mattui avtjuhämin, rähkisti sivnidämme, iedjamet, Määnäi uoppi outusi harppi iäjäset. Välji kuulai mattui ravvemin, laivudi horagallassa, tjaskudi päivätsä. Vaimu zohki, juulki, mattui kohtumi, varjeli sivnidämme määnäide. Kuulla betko mattui ravvemin, laivudi horagallassa, tjaskudi päivätsä, kuulla betko, mattui abjuhämin rahkisti sivnidämme iäjämet, kuulla betko mattui kohtumi määnäide seilluhi harppi, kuulla betko. Chalmi oini räksvuoda pohtsidämin, mattui vuenga ällämin, kähtärä iirida. Vaimu zohki, juulki, mattui kohtumi, varjeli sivnidämme määnäide. Så ska vi se vad var det nästa. Både lekte lite. Men då tar jag det på norsk. Ingenting. Ingenting å offre til fortapte guder. Hvordan tilbe glemte guder på fremmedgjorte offerplasser. Ingenting. Ingenting å offre. Ingenting. Nei, ingenting. Ingenting. Ingenting å offre. Ingenting. Nei, ingenting. Min skaper. Takk, min skaper, for at simla fortsatt kalver i reinkalvingsriene, og for at myggen fortsatt flyr rundt grønne knopper. Takk, min skaper, at fruktbarheten seirer. Det rart, min skaper, at sommerfuglene fortsatt flyr med slike klare farger, og at moltene fortsatt modnes i nattefrosten. Takk, min skaper, at livet seirer. Takk, min skaper, for at sneglen igjen viser reinkalvens horn, og at reinoksen fortsatt parer seg, mens planter og trær dør. Takk, min skaper, at fruktbarheten fortsatt seirer. Det rart, min skaper, at nordlyset fortsatt flimrer i mørketidsmånens skinn, og at sola fortsatt stiger opp i vinterens kulde. Takk, min skaper, at livet fortsatt seirer.
Tusen tack, Inga. Helt fantastiskt att få höra både samiskan och norskan, tycker jag. Jag är lite nyfiken på just det när du skriver, för man hör ju verkligen den här musikaliteten också när du läser. Hur blir de här dikterna till? Är det först och främst i liksom framförandet, eller är det alltid på papper? Skriver du alltid på samiska, eller är det ibland norska? Eller hur blir de till?
Ja, jeg skriver jo på samisk. Og jeg velger ordene veldig nøye, og så leser jeg alltid høyt. Og jeg liker å bruke stemmen på forskjellige måter. Og du har et sted spurt om det joiken som grunnlaget. Ja, jeg joiker veldig mye nå, fordi hjemme vårt joiket foreldrene mine og bestefar min, og vi barna lærte tidlig å joike, og lærte å lage joiketekster og å høre på dem. Så det kanskje ikke så rart at min sjanger ble dikt og poesi, fordi det jo det jeg har kjent helt fra siden jeg var barn. Joikene har jo sånne korte, velformulerte, poetiske tekster, som sammen med melodien beskriver mennesket, eller eller tre, eller elven, eller dyret som joikes. For vi sier at vi joiker et menneske, vi joiker et dyr, vi joiker et tre. Fordi det er litt forskjellig fra hvordan man bruker sanger. Ja, var det svar nok?
Ja, det tror jag. Jag såg en intervju med dig sedan några år tillbaka där du sa att allt du har skrivit har startat i det politiska angående det här med just vikten av att hålla det samiska vid liv, språket, jojken, kulturen. Och jag vill gärna be dig berätta lite mer om det också. För vi hör ju det här budskapet i dina böcker och jag är lite nyfiken på liksom, hur du ställer dig till det. Liksom, vad är det som litteraturen kan i det här sammanhanget som kanske andra uttryckssätt inte kan på samma sätt?
Ja, da jeg gikk på grunnskolen, barneskolen, så fikk vi ikke undervisning på samisk, og vi fikk heller ikke undervisning i samisk språk. Etter at jeg hadde gått grunnskolen og gymnaset, så hadde ikke jeg lært å skrive på mitt eget språk. Og jeg bestemte meg tidlig for at jeg skulle lære å skrive samisk, og den gang så måtte man reise helt til Oslo for å gjøre det. Og mens jeg studerte samisk, så fikk jeg jo kjennskap til samisk historie, og den norske historien, og norske myndighetenes behandling av samene, og fornorskningspolitikken. Da fikk jeg svar på en masse jeg hadde lurt på. Det at hvorfor vi ikke lærte samisk på skolen, jo, for at vi skulle jo fornorskes. Hvorfor ikke vi fikk lov å snakke samisk i friminuttene, det var samme årsaken. Hvorfor ble joiken vår stemplet for syndig? Det forstod jeg da når jeg begynte å lese samisk. Og når vi bodde på internat, hvorfor fikk ikke vi spise samisk mat? Ja, da skulle vi lære å spise norsk mat, for vi skulle jo fornorskes. Og når vi for eksempel skulle lære å sy på skolen, hvorfor fikk ikke vi lære å sy våre egne klær? Og et enormt sinne vokste i meg. Og harme mot myndighetene. Og dette var midt i samebevegelsen på 1970-tallet. Og jeg havnet blant samiske studenter på universitetet. Jeg var en veldig forsiktig aktivist da, men jeg hadde skrevet masse dikt på norsk, og jeg brente alle diktene mine. I ettertid har jeg jo angret på det, men det var det jeg da lærte om min egen kultur og min egen bakgrunn, som gjorde at det ble slik. Men jeg synes ikke at min litteratur er aktivistisk. For jeg prøver å nå lesernes hjerter og følelser med tekstene mine. Skrivingen er mitt talerør, ikke politikk. Men på en annen måte så er det alltid noe politisk som er utgangspunkt for det jeg skriver. Jeg skulle bare si at blodpølserappen, den er blitt kjempepopulær her i Sápmi. Og jeg vet at jeg med denne har nådd masse småhjerter. Barna er kjempeglade i den. Men också andre i Sápmi.
Vi får se om vi har tid lite senare så kanske vi får höra blodpölse-rappen. Men jag tror att jag går över till Andri nu. And I'll switch to English as I do so.
Jag pratar lika svenska.
Ja.
Eller plantinaviska.
Plantinaviska. So you've been able to follow some of what...
Så jag har förstått det hela samtalet. Men inte samiskan. Men jag kunde gott den lid. Vårt inte lides.
Vill du prata engelska eller svenska?
Ja, vi kan prata engelska. För
Okej.
jag kan inte alla orden från min bok på skandinaviska.
Then I'll switch to English too, so I can keep my languages in check in my head. I think I would just like to start by asking you to read for us.
Okay, I can read a short chapter from the beginning of the book, where I am sitting in my grandmother's house. She is 97 years old. In some way we are in the same range with ancestors and grandmothers and
there's a nice link here between
descendants
and generations.
So the phone rings and Grandma Hulda runs to answer it. We sit down to eat pancakes as the radio hums low in the background. I ask Hulda Filippia, my daughter, to do a little math puzzle. How old is your great-grandmother if she was born in 1924? She's 94, Hulda replies immediately. Fast math, I say. Well, I knew how old she is, Hulda says and grins. All right, but now you'll really have to calculate. When will you be 94? So it would be the year I was born, 2008, plus 94. Exactly, I say. She takes a piece of paper and a pen and looks skeptically at the sheet. She shows me the result as though it must be a misunderstanding. Is that right? 2102? Yes. Hopefully you'll be as energetic as Grandma Hulda is now. Maybe you'll even be living in this same house. Maybe your 10-year-old great-granddaughter will be visiting, sitting with you in this kitchen in 2102, just like you are sitting here right now. Yes, maybe, says Hulda, sipping a glass of milk. One more equation. When will your great-granddaughter be 94 years old? Hulda writes some figures on a piece of paper with a little help. Would she have been born in 2092? Yes, that's right. Okay, 2092 plus 94 is 2186. She laughs at the thought. Yes, can you imagine that? You, born in 2008, might know a girl who will still be alive in the year 2186. Hulda purses her mouth and looks into the air. Can I go now, she asks. Almost, I say. I have one more puzzle. How long is it from 1924 to 2186? Hulda does the math. Is it 262 years? Imagine that. 262 years, I say. That's the length of time you connect across. You'll know the people who span this time. Your time is the time of the people you know and love, the time that molds you, and your time is also the time of the people you will know and love, the time that you will shape. You can touch 262 years with your bare hands. Your grandmother taught you. You will teach your great-granddaughter. You can have a direct impact on the future right up to the year 2186. Imagine that.
Thank you. And I think we'll even just continue to, I asked you to read another excerpt from the book as well, from a chapter called The Words We Can't Understand. Yeah.
We believe words are easily understood, that understanding them is natural to us, that the world we perceive and understand from newspapers and books is the world we perceive and understand. It's not that simple, not at all. For example, we're accustomed to letting words like global warming pass us by while we respond to far less significant words. If we could perceive in granular detail what the words global warming contain, they should be like the threat in a fairy tale. We should feel terror. It can take decades, even centuries, to understand new words and concepts. Pastor Hallgrímur Pétursson is considered one of the masters of Icelandic language and poetry. His Passion hymns were first printed in 1666. The 13th hymn begins like this: "Hear my soul, this sinfulness, conscience should have intervened." The words in this verse, soul, sinfulness, conscience, these words were dominant in the era's culture. For centuries, these words were pure power in the hands of priests and the ruling class. Men confessed their sinfulness, purified their consciousness, and secured their eternal souls in heaven. But these words had not always existed. During the 9th century, the age of settlement, it was unlikely the Nordic people would have understood Hallgrímur's lines. Soul, sinfulness, and conscience entered the language with the Christian faith around the year 1000. These words would not have registered for the enterprising Vikings. They robbed and pillaged without worrying about their conscience or about sinfulness. Men gained honor and esteem according to their raids. They were not to forgive their enemies, but instead obligated to take revenge. When they didn't take revenge, they might have felt a sensation that in some small way resembled a pang of conscience. But the word itself did not exist. The poetry of the Vikings, skaldic poetry, was based on strict, specialized poetic conventions. In the wake of Christianity, a 10th century poet would have faced a troubling challenge. Poems at the time were written using kennings derived from Norse mythology. They referred to earth as Odin's bride, and to heaven as dwarf's helmet. How could such a poet explain God as the creator of heaven and earth, while writing in this tradition in which poetry itself was described as mead of Æsir, or Odin's gift, or Kvasir's blood? Obviously, it would be problematic to refer to the pagan gods of the Æsir as the creator of dwarf's helmet and Odin's bride, relying on the very pagan worldview that Christianity intended to clear away. Words affect our emotions, our feelings. Words enable us to get a handhold on the state of being and describe what slumbers in our chests. Words can tether actions that were previously invisible, frame them. In Icelandic, we have a word to describe a feeling of sweet yet melancholic nostalgia, the feeling that comes over you when you're listening to a meaningful, possibly sad song from the past. This word is angurværð, which you might directly translate as tender sadness. The Faroese have this concept too, but their word is sorgblíðni, which literally means gentle grief. These sister tongues, Icelandic and Faroese, have adopted two pairs of synonyms to express the same sentiment: tender, gentle, sadness, grief. I'm not sure if a mournful Faroese feels exactly the same as a melancholic Icelander, but we could use such words to enrich our language. The tender remorse of angurværð might suffice to name the feeling that fills one's breast when people sing a tranquil song around a campfire. The gentle grief of sorgblíðni is analogous, but in there is still a deeper sorrow, a greater mourning. I felt a strange angurværð when I looked at those old pictures with grandfather. Now that he is gone, my heart is filled with sorgblíðni.
Thank you. I think these two excerpts kind of highlight two of the themes in the book. That is the generational link that's so clearly visible in how you weave your family history into the book. And then so also this battle with language and the words that we're trying to grasp the meaning of, or maybe can't hold on to, in a way.
Yes. So that's true. So it's and then the third pole might be just science.
Yes, exactly.
The science of what modern scientists have produced as the consequences of our 20th century development.
Yeah.
So
you've been deeply engaged in these matters for a long time as a writer and activist in environmental issues, and I think this book has been on your drawing board for quite a long time.
Yes,
as well.
You could say the book has been. It was published 2019 in Icelandic, so it had been kind of directly as a concept existing for 10 years
Yeah.
by then. And I had smuggled in, because I didn't find a way to
put it together.
I smuggled in 2 books actually in between while I was writing it, and so the language, so the generational part is the attempt to largen our scope of time, remove us from the feeling of the 4-year terms of politics, the quarterly annual income report of business, and connect us to, so when a scientist, and maybe reclaim the future from maybe sci-fi and dystopia, which I have written myself, to make pancake sci-fi. That is the goal of our future is not technology. The goal is to live in a stable earth, in communities with our family and ancestors, and just to continue this cycle of life on this planet. And the idea is that because we're so disconnected from 2100, even 2050, and when a scientist tells us that we're heading for a wall or off a cliff at that time, and we're not reacting, that is because culturally we're not adapted to really relating to even the life cycle of our own children, so which is totally irresponsible and actually strange that we're producing children into a world, but we're not. And I think every generation believes they were making the world better for their children, or at least doing their best to do that. But now scientifically we know that we're not doing that. And we're undermining the future for our children. So that is a very difficult existential dilemma that our generation is living in, and within this society that does not move properly into the right direction. And then language, the idea is that, and that's why I also was very fond of your book, because I think and I can see it in many places, that the combined rationality of, you could say, technology, colonialism, rational thinking, the combined outcome of all this rational, systematic thinking, our science, our institutions, our progress, the combined, that always kind of marginalized, like the worlds of Sápmi or just traditional thinking of saying, no, this mountain is holy. They'll say, no, it's not holy, it's a coal mine. So this language that always marginalized all these beliefs and cultures of something being holy or something being, so the combined rationality is a world going off the rails. So the ocean going out of balance, the thunder gods awakening, like in your poetry. So actually in my book I'm flirting with, or I'm using mythology and other ways of thinking, because the outcome of our combined rationality does not contain more wisdom than an algae bloom. There is an algae bloom of the most simple cells of just growing into the resource, just to collapse again into after that resource has been finished. So I'm looking for a language, how do I talk about something that is bigger than language, that is the fundament of our fundaments, that is how can I talk about us changing the oceans more in the next 100 years than in the previous 50 million years? And we're not talking about all the ancestors of man, because man is only 5 million years old. So we're talking about a single human being living a greater change of the oceans than 10 times all the ancestors of man. So that is just...
that's too big to grasp.
That's too big to grasp.
Yeah.
And then you look at what is happening. It's a 0.3 change in pH. And that's too small to grasp, 0.3.
It's not.
How can that be? How can that be the most alarming figure that you will hear?
But when you read the book, as a reader, you get the feeling that the key is in storytelling, really, or that's what you're trying to do, or doing in the book, and combining all this ungraspable facts and tiny numbers and huge numbers
Yes, so the book is an experiment or an attempt to tell this. So because I can't. So and my metaphor was the black hole, because the scientist he can tell you there's a black hole there, but he can't look straight into the black hole to understand it. He has to look at the periphery, how it's drawing in neighboring stars and galaxies. So to attach me to the future, to 2120, I have to connect to my grandmother. To understand scientific data, I have to merge that with mythology, because mythology is one of the ways that we use to expand. I can't say it's enormous to the 12th degree, but I can say the holy cow is dying.
And on some level we understand that. Yeah.
And I'm also, again, kind of, I'm deeply respecting science, but at the same time questioning if the rational economic systems that we're living in is actually rational. And and storytelling is one of the most ancient ways humans have used to understand things, and it carries meaning, emotions, and one of the ideas was that science talks to the brain, but stories talk to the heart. And there's this disconnection between brain and heart, and I was actually urged by scientists. They told me, I made this graph and nothing changes. And then I went through the history of paradigm shifts, and they always happen through poetry. Poetry, stories, language, and culture. So we did not the human rights, women's rights did not come because a political scientist was sitting in the university producing a graph about
or a pie chart.
A pie chart.
No.
It came through songs, storytelling, experiences, music, film, pushing the edges, and activism. So I saw my role as a translator between science and the public, of me living here and now as a writer, with perhaps the gift of storytelling. I had the obligation to
do you feel that writers as a whole maybe have a duty or an obligation to kind of grapple with these?
Well, I don't like telling people what to do, because I also deeply believe that story, just what a writer writes and what he feels he has to write is very often the right thing to write. And you should not force somebody to put issues into his books, because we also need to reflect on various levels. But personally, I felt that this was what I needed to do, and also after having lots of lectures, meeting scientists, actually understanding that I could talk both to maybe young people and scientists, and even though scientists in the field told me they understood their science better after it had been filtered through stories. They even didn't really understand what they had in their hands, because it was also siloed. But how this book came out in 2019. In 2020 we had a very weird year happen. And there's been, of course, this call for action for many years from the environmental activists, and then suddenly the world just halted. How did that feel, watching that, having just published this book? It was very interesting. It was because I ask in my book, if the oceans are going out of balance, the atmosphere is going out of balance, the glaciers are melting before our eyes, the sea level is rising at our feet, why don't we pull the handbrake and just stop everything for half a year, rethink everything before we move on? Do we control these cars, or are these cars already self-driving us off the cliff? Are these systems created for us, or are we just some kind of
a cog in the wheel?
Who controls these systems, and why are these systems? So I ask this question in the book, and then suddenly the handbrake is pulled. And what Greta was asking for, and everyone, and then suddenly everything reveals, and we see that yes, there is a handbrake, because they always said there's no handbrake. You just have to buy ecological shampoo, or something. Like, only the market can fix this crisis. So the governments are not allowed to. They can politely ask somebody to, make better cars, or please make a windmill or something, but to really force things through, not possible. So scientists were getting very gloomy and very, very dark. So I think we just got the biggest metaphor that humanity, and I'm not diminishing the lives that and suffering of the last year, but for the first time, I think, in human history, humans have collectively felt a situation in their bodies, on their streets. Even the Second World War was not happening everywhere at the same time. 9/11 took place, Diana was shot, or Diana died, John Lennon was shot. So like our collective experiences, so suddenly we have like a 1.5 year of a deep collective experience that goes both ways, goes into suffering, but also goes into ease and relief for others that suddenly feel then taken out of the speed and this cycle. So the young people now, so there are two things happening. So the young people that really suffered from not going to school, not partying, the best days of their life, years of their life, taken away from them. My daughter, she's 19, she hasn't, so the high school years, the gymnasium years, just destroyed for that generation. And then those that are younger, 5 years younger, this generation of the climate strikes. So they have the climate strikes, they go through this, and they go through all these #MeToo paradigm shifts, where the 60-year-old man is not making the rules of how you interact in the workplace. The 30-year-old woman, she makes the rules of how everybody behaves in the workplace. So the young making the rules for the older. So this generation that has gone through the climate strikes, being deeply political from young age, which my generation was not, going through the coronavirus, seeing neoliberalism and seeing the government taking action to preserve the lives of the older people, and also on the internet, seeing how you just hashtag bad habits to death. This generation in the next 5 years will be furious, because they will look at the data and they will be asked to pay into a pension fund, and they will look at the assets of the pension fund and say, everything this pension fund is doing is only destroying the planet before I become 70. And they will say, take this pension fund and buy windmills. They will be very radically, they will very radically use all these experiences to make this paradigm shift that I'm maybe writing about in the book. And what I'm also dealing with is language, because we're so stuck in the language of the last 30 years. Yes, we will save the climate, but it has to be good business. All this, we can't talk about green economy, green growth. We're so stuck in this language, it's almost impossible to talk. So that's why maybe in the Sápmi language there's some words about how to live in harmony with nature without saying green growth, without saying it's good business. It's good something. It's necessary something. So that's what I'm asking is, and I'm making people aware in the book that I'm trying to talk, but I'm stuck in the old language. I'm trying to talk about God, but I have to talk about the creator of Odin's bride and the dwarf's helmet, because I'm stuck with all the legacy of an old paradigm, and I cannot detach myself from the language that I'm stuck in. So maybe this book will be very outdated in 50 years because
let's hope so.
Let's hope
in
so.
a way. maybe a weird note to end it on, but yeah. Yes, we are slowly running out of time, as we usually do in these scenarios. But I wanted to just ask you, because you've written a lot of fantasy as well. Was the process of writing this book very different from your writing process when you're writing just pure fiction and fantasy, or how do you approach the two parts of you as a writer, or is it just one part?
I feel like it's all coming from the same place, and it's just I write what I feel is easiest to write at that time, and what is easiest to write is what I'm focused on and what I'm interested in, or where my attention is. And there's of course lots of imagination, and I feel like it's very similar, but the difference of course is I had to dive deep into climate science, ocean science, glacial science, and then all my family history and history of Asia and the Dalai Lama. So of course much more research, and so behind each paragraph might be a few books. So much more research and thinking in that way, but I feel, and I've often said that, you think about the future, that's fantasy, sci-fi. You think so as a writer, as an individual, you stand here and now. I can write about us, that's contemporary fiction. I can call my grandmother and write about her, that's historic fiction. I can imagine the life of my children, that's science fiction. And I don't feel like these are different categories. This is just in what direction I'm stretching my arm. So in this book I'm stretching my arm forward, and it's not science fiction still, it's, so I feel it's all the same.
Jag byter till svenska nu igen. Vi börjar gå mot slutet här på den tiden vi har, men jag ville ge er chansen om ni vill att fråga, om ni har några frågor till varandra. Andri fick läsa Ingas utdrag ur din bok. Inga har ju inte haft möjligheten än att läsa om tiden och vattnet. Nej.
Men jag syns det var likevel intressant att höra på dig nu när du snackat om din bok.
Ja, tack. Jag tänkte att din bok var väldigt intressant, och du skriver precis som, för jag tror att tiden är mytologisk. Att du skriver om gudarna som vaknar, eller som rör havet och rister, kan säga rister.
Skakar.
Som skakar världen för våra barn eller barnebarn. Och det var en I'll say it in English. There was like this very ancient thread that was very. It was very. That tone, this kind of Völuspá tone in some of the poems, really fits the situation, because, and that's what I'm writing about as well, is when we're shaking the foundations, we are back to creation and destruction stories. We're not in history, because history is only about people fighting each other, and ideas and everything that people have been dealing with each other. But now we're seeing the foundations, the oceans, the weather, the thunder gods, all these things. So that's why it makes sense to go back to mythology, because that's the only way to explain what's happening.
Jag tror vi har bara ett par minuter på oss till, men om du vill, Inga, så skulle jag faktiskt jättegärna vilja avsluta med din blodpölse-rap. Har du lust att läsa den för oss? Kanske berätta vad det är för något.
Ja, i samisk mattradition så lagar vi pölser av tarmer. Vet du vad tarmer är? Ja. Och det syns vi är väldigt gott.
Vi har ju blodmör på Island.
Blodmörsrap, jag
Så har jag satt samman navnene på de forskjellige tarmene och allt, och så laget den. sånn rap. Doggy doggy laga laga doggy laga laga doggy laga doggy 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 laga laga doggy 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 laga laga doggy laga levsos skaparos Chaksa 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 chalmas chalmas chaksa 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 chalmas chalmas mange boidi mange boidi mange boidi mange boidi sa posat sa posat sa posat sa posat sa posat sa posat doggy lagga doggy lagga doggy lagga chaksa chaksa chalmas chalmas chaksa chalmas chaksa chalmas gaparos gaparos lefsos doggy lagga. Sameradion her har laget en sånn her video som sendes hver høst når det regnslakt med denne rappen.
Vad härligt. Tusen tack för rappen och tusen tack för att du var med oss idag, Inga. Så trevligt från Karasjok. Tusen tack Andri här i Nordens hus. Det var det sista författarsamtalet i den här serien. Så vi tackar för oss.
Ja. Hej då. Tack till er två.
Tack.
Hej.
Ha det.